Your theme this year is literacy, and so we're going to be talking about speech and language and how development of speech and language skills impacts early literacy. And my hope is to leave you with some really practical guidelines for things you can do in your classrooms to help your children and your students as they're learning and growing in all of these areas. So I'm just going to share my screen here and get this presentation started. All right, so we're going to be talking about supporting speech, language, and literacy development in early childhood. So, as Susan said, I am a speech language pathologist and a Montessori teacher. I have Susan to thank for my introduction to Montessori. She was the head of school at my daughter's Montessori school when I first discovered this amazing educational, method. And so I was a speech pathologist first. I worked as a Montessori guide and teacher for 8 years. I was trained through the early childhood credential from Westside Montessori, their teacher education program. I know some of you are familiar with it. Some of you might even be enrolled right now, and I'm seeing you in classes. I work there as an assistant teacher in the early childhood credential program and also the Montessori inclusion endorsement. For anyone who's not familiar with that, that is an endorsement program that Westside offers that incorporates Montessori education and philosophy with current research on evidence-based and best practice for special education. But then my work as a speech pathologist, so I've returned to speech pathology. I currently own and run Rosebridge Speech Therapy up here in Albany, New York. And I work mostly at this point with early childhood and school age, but I also have experience in early intervention, so birth to 3, as well as end of life care in skilled nursing and rehabilitation. So our goals for today, I really want everyone here to understand the typical patterns and milestones that children reach as they develop their speech and language from birth to 6 years old. And then I'd love for you to gain an understanding of how those speech and language skills impact early literacy skills. And then the last thing we're going to do, we're going to spend some time identifying ways that we can support speech and language development and early literacy in the Montessori classroom. So if you were with us last year, this might look familiar, but as a reminder, speech and language are two different things. When we're talking about them today, we're going to be referring to two different things. So the American Speech Language Hearing Association defines speech as how we say sounds and words, so articulation, the way we use our mouth to produce sounds, as well as voice, so the quality of our voice as we're speaking, and then fluency, how smooth is our speech as we're talking. When we're talking about language, this has more to do with the meaning, so the words that we use, how we combine them to share ideas and to get what we want. And this includes our vocabulary and grammar and pragmatics. And pragmatics, as a reminder, is the word we use to describe social language, how we're interacting with other people. So we're going to go over some of the milestones for speech development, speech sounds. We're first going to talk about this, birth to the first year. So this is the age of cooing and really in the beginning, sounds that are more like play and just sort of like experimenting with their speech. So babies will use a lot of what we call reflexive vocalizations that can be, making raspberry sounds with their lips or popping noises and just kind of sometimes even shrieking can be a reflexive vocalization. It doesn't necessarily have an intent. They're just playing with the sounds that they can make. And of course, those cooing sounds that we know all babies make. From 7 to 12 months, this is where children start to use their mouth and their oral structures to make sounds with intention. So they will be creating consonant sounds, especially the ones in the front of the mouth. So your p, b, w, all of those things use the lips. It's very easy for children, if they have, good vision, they can see that we are making those sounds using our mouth, and they're able to imitate us. And so 7 to 12 months is the age of babbling. And those of you that work in the infant room, you might know this. You see a lot of babbling as it develops. And we start with canonical babbling, which is the repetition of sounds over and over again. So ma, 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 ba, 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 and they just keep going and going. And then there's later, as children have a better handle on a variety of sounds, they'll start to engage in variegated babbling. And this is where they'll combine different sounds to, sing that don't make any sense to us as far as words go, but it's a chance for them, again, to learn how to control their speech mechanisms. So you might hear things like bima do mi ba, things like that. They're going to be including a bunch of different syllables together. At about a year old, between 12 and 14 months, this is the age where children start to learn how to combine different sounds to make true words. So you'll start to hear first words emerging between 12 and 14 months. And again, these are going to be words that are made with sounds that we produce mostly in the front of our mouth, because those are still the sounds that are developmentally expected of a child at this age. Something to point out, I sometimes get questions about this, like, oh, 12 months, a year old, my child hasn't said their first word yet, or they only have one word or two words. So 12 to 14 months, we like to see those signs of first words emerging. Or parents might say, my child is still babbling so much, and that is absolutely appropriate at this point, because children are going to have a few words and they'll start to gain more and more over time, but they're still going to be filling in all that space with a lot of that babbling that we've heard prior. So I'm going to show you just a quick video here of my daughter. She was 16 months old at the time, so she had some words, but she was still engaging in a lot of that variegated babbling, just combining different sounds. Her voice rises and falls. She has a lot of inflection, but she doesn't necessarily, she's trying to talk to me, but she's not necessarily expressing herself using true words yet. And I apologize. I know I mentioned this earlier. She's 15 years old now, so this is a cell phone video taken a long time ago. The quality's a little different. But mostly what we're doing is we're just listening. We're listening for those different sounds, a variety of sounds being strung together. And she does say at one point, she says the word book, but it's very fast, so you might not catch it. So there's one true word and a lot of babbling.
Are you reading me a story? That's it? That's the story? Wee! You like the chair, huh?
So as you could hear in there, she didn't really have anything to say that we could understand fully. I think, again, just the word book at one point, but otherwise she was just enjoying engaging and mimicking what she was understanding as how to talk at that point, and practicing all those sounds that her body was getting used to making. Those of you who work in the infant room and you start to see this thing in the toddler room as they start to get a little bigger, um, it must be so fun to watch this. That's one of my favorite stages of development.
Are you
Oh,
reading me a story?
sorry. Every time I try to advance, it plays it again. Okay, so this is a chart that I pulled together recently, and I've provided Susan a PDF of it as well. It's a little bit newer than what we talked about last year as far as speech sound development, and that is based on some new research that was done. In 2020, Crow and McLeod did a meta-analysis and a review of all the data available on studies that have been done for consonant development in American English. And what they found was that while in the past, we've had all these charts that say children don't develop certain sounds until almost 8 years old. What they found through their review is that actually most children in the United States, so we are speaking specifically about English, have acquired all of their speech sounds by the time they're 6 years old. And so this is the order that we would expect to see a child developing their sounds in. So 2 years, you do see a lot of those front sounds, B, M, P, W, as well as a couple of others, N, which is also sort of in the front if you think about where you place your tongue when you're saying it. B, same thing. And then, not until about 3 years do we start seeing sounds that are further back in the mouth and maybe harder to see. So this is a chart that will be made available to you. I tried to create it as like a quick printout that you can just hang somewhere and have easily accessible. So, like I said, we've got speech development and then we have language development. So, when we're talking about language, as a reminder, it falls under two different categories. Expressive language is the ability to use language to share thoughts and ideas. And then receptive language is the ability to understand the ideas that are shared with you through what other people say. And as a reminder as well, children will often understand much more than they can express. So receptive language is usually ahead of receptive language is ahead of expressive language as a child develops. So these are some of the typical language development milestones that you would see for receptive language. This was shared through from the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders. I liked the way they had it laid out. However, in the resources PDF that I've sent to Susan that she will share with you, there is a link to ASHA's website. They recently revamped their milestones pages, and it's included for parents and caregivers and teachers and anyone to go on and look. And you can look up by age what receptive language skills a child should have, what expressive language skills a child should have, what speech sounds a child should have, and even a little bit on like hearing information, which, we also want to make sure we're paying attention to a child's hearing skills. Otherwise, their speech and language will be impacted. So from 7 months to a year, as we said in speech, this is about the time children are starting to babble, and that's because they're really starting to listen and tune in to what's being said around them and the sounds in their environment. They're going to, as they get a little bit older, getting closer to a year, they're going to understand when you say common words for things in their environment. So if a child is with you at school all day, and it's time for them to have a diaper change. If you're in the infant room and you say diaper, that child, they can't say it yet. They don't have the motor skills to say that word, but they're going to understand what you mean. And then as they become more mobile, they'll even be able to respond to requests. So a child who's crawling, you could say, come here, and they know that means you want them to move and get closer. So they can follow those directions. From a year to 2 years, they're starting to be able to follow those simple commands that involve other objects. Roll the ball, jump up and down, that kind of thing. They can point to objects if you name them. So again, things that are in their environment that they see every day, that it's vocabulary that they're exposed to on a regular basis. If you say it, they should be able to point to it. Or you say, where is your shoe? They can respond to that simple question. They might be able to tell you, or they might be able to point. It's all communication, whether it's a gesture or actual words. From 2 to 4 years old. So now we're moving through that toddler transition and into that early childhood setting. A child is going to start learning how to follow commands that are a little more complex. You might actually be able to give them 2 steps. You know, hang your bag and change your shoes, right? You don't have to do one at a time. Or you might be able to add some prepositions. So that's like location, like put your shoes in your cubby, or hang your jacket on the hook. Now they're starting to understand not only that they have to do, manipulate an object, but there's some additional information where it needs to go, or how to do something, or what order to do it in. They can also start to answer more of those WH questions. So from 1 to 2 years, they're probably going to be able to answer those questions that refer to what, like an object, or where, if it's within their environment, and even who, if it's about someone that they're familiar with. When they're between 2 and 4, they're going to start having that ability to answer slightly more complex when and why questions. And then by 5 years and older, you should be able to give a child a set of directions with more than two steps, or even some temporal concepts within the directions. So temporal is referring to time, and you might be able to switch the word order. So you might say, first hang your jacket, then change your shoes. Or you could switch it and say, before you change your shoes, hang your jacket. Around 5 is the age where they're going to be able to understand that. Prior to that, no matter what order you say the words in, they're going to either do it in that exact order, or for some children, they latch on to the very last thing you said, and that's going to be the thing that they do. They also by the time they're 5, a child should be paying attention to short stories and responding to questions. Now, I know, especially in the classrooms, we read to our children a lot. We should absolutely be reading to them before they're 5 years old. What this is referring to is that ability to attend to the details in a story. So younger children are perhaps enjoying the pictures, they understand what the story is, but when you're asking questions after, it's a little more challenging for them to go back and respond. Whereas a child at 5 years old is going to be able to keep track of that story in their mind, pay attention as it moves along, and then go back and think about it to answer some questions. And you might see your younger children doing that as well, and that's okay. That's the beauty of our multi-age classroom because they have that example of the older children. But the expectation is that by 5, they're doing these things. And a 5-year-old should also be able to understand most of what is said to them. When it comes to expressive language, the child from 7 years or 7 months to 1 year, excuse me, we've already talked about babbling. So that's their initial attempts at making language, is by playing with those sounds. They're mostly going to communicate with gestures. So communication that is really intentional is going to be pointing or putting their arms up to be picked up. And then by their first birthday, we'll expect to see one or two words, and it's usually something that's really meaningful to them. So probably somewhere along the lines of mama or dada, that kind of thing. 1 to 2 years is where we see that language explosion. And so that's where children are learning new words almost daily. They're pointing to things and saying, what's that? What's that? And they want to know the names of everything. They also start to put two or more words together. This happens on the later end as we're getting close to 2 years. You'll start to see them combining words, not always grammatically. They might ask simple questions like, where kitty, not where is the kitty, or they'll say, me go, and that's fine. They're using words, they're using their understanding of language and putting words together to make new meaning. From 2 to 4 years, a child should have a word for almost everything in their familiar environments. So at school, they should know the names for most of the materials that are in the room that they've had experience with. Of course, there are going to be things present that they don't know the names of, and that will happen the longer they're in the room, they're exposed to things. But for things that are familiar, they should have a name or a label. They should also be able to talk about daily events and use sentences with 4 or more words. And then by 5 years old, we would expect a child to be able to tell a simple story in sequence. So it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end. They should be able to communicate easily with both the adults in their environment and their peers. And they're going to start creating sentences that are much more complex. So they might have compound sentences, I went to the store and I bought a new toy, that kind of thing. Or using adjectives and descriptors like, I got a really big ball, as opposed to just, I got a ball. They're learning how to add on to their language and make it more complex. So this is a short video of my daughter at 2 years and 8 months old. So she's kind of in the middle of this language development that we were just talking about. And this video shows a combination of expressive and receptive language skills. She's got sentences that are definitely growing in length, longer than 4 words. And she's answering some WH questions, but she's still too young to understand some of those temporal questions. So at one point, I'm asking her, I use the word before, and she doesn't really understand what I'm asking. And so I have to try again, and I say earlier. And she's using her knowledge of what these words mean to figure out that I'm asking when, but she's not sure what a when question is at this point. So, and I do have some subtitles because she was still working on some speech sounds at this point.
Singing, watch and see, do the dancing queen.
What song is that, Eiley?
Cause in the dance, the
The
queen.
Dancing Queen?
Mommy,
Do you love that song?
now I can one with Lovey.
Oh, wow.
With Lovey so fast.
Yes, you can. You can spin with Lovey very fast. Where did you hear that song?
And Daddy Pew.
Daddy's computer?
Yeah.
But before that, where did you tell me you heard it? Did you hear it earlier today? Where?
In Cindy's house.
At Cindy's house. And what do you think of that song?
It's the dancing queen. Mommy, I had to fold the laundry.
You have to fold the laundry? Okay, well, can you say bye-bye?
Bye-bye.
So that's just a short example of the kinds of conversations you can start having with children as their expressive and receptive language skills are growing and they're understanding that back and forth of a conversation. Oh,
Singing.
sorry about that. There we go. All right, so some other speech and language skills that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about children's development, and especially as it relates to literacy skills, are these things called meta-linguistics. And so these are kind of these like ideas about talking about language or thinking about language. So the first thing I like to talk about is semantics. And the simple definition of semantics is understanding the meanings of the words that we use, understanding how combinations of words and phrases create meaning, and then being able to use those words ourselves to express ourselves. So first, a child needs to be able to do this verbally. They need to be able to hear these things and understand them and say them. And then that's going to translate later into their ability to understand reading and writing. So a good example for semantics, you see this kind of visual here. It talks about a concept word and it has related word kind of spread all over the place. And so semantics is also thinking about how the definition of one word makes you think of many other words that are related. Children build in their minds what's called a schema. It's almost like a categorization of the words that they're learning. And so, for example, if a child sees a dog and what's that? What's that? And you give them the word dog. Well, now their knowledge of something furry with legs is that it's a dog. And then they might see a horse a few days later and say, dog. And you say, no, horse. And you might point out, like, oh, it has a long nose and it's very tall. And now they've changed their schema. They've gone from, well, a dog is not just furry with four legs, it's shorter, it makes a barking sound, and now they're understanding a horse has some different characteristics. And so I thought it would be fun to give you a few words and see if you can think of something. The word that I'm thinking of is our concept word, just to give you an idea to see how semantics works in action. So try to think about what word I might be thinking of if I say to you pages, words, letters, author, characters, illustrations. Those are all semantically related to the concept of a book. So this is the word that we're thinking of, but all of these other words are related to that definition. So children, we don't teach them this explicitly necessarily, but they have to have an understanding of semantics. The other thing a child needs to understand is how syntax works in the language that they are speaking. So different languages have different syntax, and bilingualism came up earlier in the parent session. And I do want to stress that there are some different milestones. Things look a little different with bilingual and multilingualism, but at the end of the day, there's no reason for a child not to be able to learn both languages with equal ability when they're given the time. So sometimes it takes a little extra time with bilingual children, but they should be able to understand the syntax of both languages. So for this purposes, we're just going to talk about English syntax, but the same would be true no matter what language we're talking about. So syntax is the order in which words are combined to make meaningful sentences. And sometimes that can even define the relationship of the words within a sentence, depending on the word order. So you'll see here in this cartoon, this woman says, watching was I a movie? In English, this is not the syntax that we would use. It doesn't follow our rules. So the man says, you mean I was watching a movie? Children learn this by listening to the speech that we're modeling for them all the time in their environment. And so it's really important for us to make sure that we are using proper syntax when we're speaking. An example of how the relationship among parts of a sentence might be changed is if we took the sentence, the dog rolled over the log. You can all picture in your head the order that we've put them in means that there's a dog and it's moving its body over the log. If we switch the word order, the log rolled over the dog, that changes the meaning of our sentence. It changes what object is doing the action and what is being acted upon, right? So that's why syntax is so important, because later when children start reading sentences, in order for them to comprehend what's happening, they need to have an understanding of proper word order. And the last metalinguistic skill that I want to mention is morphology. So morphology, the word morph means to change. Morphemes that's the word that we use for the smallest unit of meaning in a word. So this can include root words, and then it includes things like prefixes and suffixes. And I promise I'm not going to give you a whole like high school English class dissertation on prefixes and suffixes. But just as an example, if you take a look at the picture on the left, we have three eggs. And the words we
One,
can use to
two,
describe them
three,
are
four,
big,
five.
bigger, biggest. So big would be our root word. Bigger combines the root word and then the suffix er. Er has meaning. Er means more, more big. Then we go to the last one, biggest. Est, E-S-T, is a morpheme and it has meaning. When we add est to something, it means the most. So biggest, the most big. You can do it in the opposite order and it's still going to work. Small, smaller, smallest, right? And so children have to learn all of the morphemes in their language to understand how when different pieces are added to a word, it changes its meaning. And research by Brown, this research has been around for a while, but there's really not been anything recent to sort of challenge this thought that all of the morphemes in English are acquired by the age of 4. So children know that if they add ing to something, they don't think ing, they're not thinking in letters, they're just thinking in sounds. Ing, they know going is how we say we're doing something, right? I am going. And if they don't add am, they know they have to say I go. And there is a resource page that Susan should be able to give to you. There's a link if you're interested. You can actually look at all of the morphemes in English if you go to this link for Brown's morphemes, and it will show you all of the morphemes in English and the age that children are expected to acquire them by. But we could do a whole session just on that alone. So I invite you to go and check that out if you're interested. All right, so now we're going to move into taking all of these things we know about speech development, language development, and combining it into early literacy skills. And when we talk about literacy, we're talking about reading, we're talking about writing, but very early on, those early literacy skills, we know that it has nothing to do with letters yet and seeing letters. We're starting off with sounds. And that's why speech sound development is so important because children have to be able to hear and discriminate between sounds to develop these early literacy skills. So we're going to talk about the three fawns. We're going to talk about phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and what the difference is between the two, and then phonics. So we'll start with phonological awareness because that's the big umbrella term. Phonological awareness is taking sounds and units of language and being able to manipulate them and understand them. So a child with good phonological awareness understands what a word is. How would you define a word, right, to a child? They understand that a word is a single thought. It has meaning. It's got a very direct meaning. Then they know about syllables. They have to understand that we can break a word into beats. Happy, sad, birthday, those sorts of things. So listening for how words are broken into beats. They also have to understand the concepts of rhyme and onset rhyme. So onset rhyme is taking an initial sound and separating it from the rest of the words. So in the case of the word cat, again, just with listening and speaking, no letters, if you say, what are the sounds you hear in the word cat? And they're talking about the word as a whole. We're just looking for that initial sound. They're going to say, or what's the first sound you hear in the word cat? And the rest of the word is at, right? For rhyme, you need onset rhyme to then be able to rhyme. You want to be able to hear the beginning sound and then the rest of the word. So at, b, at, cat, bat, those rhyme. Again, these examples that we have at the bottom, frog, dog, cat, bat, any examples that you choose when you're teaching early phonological awareness and early rhyming skills, it's not combining words with them, it's just visual so that they are saying the words and listening for the sounds themselves. So that was phonological awareness, that sort of big overarching idea. And that's the umbrella that we're working under when we take it down to phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness is in reference to phonemes. That is the smallest unit of sound we make in a word. So every sound we make is one phoneme. And then children need to be able to hear the different sounds in a word. So the phonemic awareness skills that we talk about are segmenting. You say a word like cat. I hear three sounds in the word cat. Let's say them. What sounds do you hear? Ah, right. Ah are the three sounds in cat. Again, it's written out here for you to see, but when you're working with a child or talking to a child, it's only going to be auditory and verbal. Blending sounds goes in the opposite direction. Ooh, I wonder what word, this makes. Let's say these sounds. D, ah, g. If we put them together, it makes dog. So they're learning that the sounds put together make a word. Substitution is actually starting to play around with the sounds a little bit. Say the word pan. A child says pan. Can you change the p to a k? What word do you get? And they should be able to change it to can. And then manipulation is when you have a word already and you add or delete a sound. So the example I give, and I did this on purpose, has a sh sound. And of course, in the alphabet, and when we're talking about phonics, it's represented by two letters. But if you're listening, sh is just one sound. So if I said to a child, let's take the word elf and put sh at the beginning, what do you get? Shelf, right? And then you can do it in the opposite direction. Let's say the word shelf. What happens if I take away the sh sound? What do we get? And so children should be able to manipulate and play around with the sounds in individual words. This is really important later, especially for spelling, as they're trying to work on those early spelling skills. And finally, we have phonics. And phonics is simply the word we use to discuss the correlation between the sounds or the phonemes, that's where the phon comes from, the sound and the symbol. So it's that understanding that an alphabet letter represents a specific speech sound. And that's what phonics is. So when we're talking about phonics awareness, it's understanding the alphabet relationship. Many of you are familiar with the reading rope, especially those of you in the early childhood classroom. I put it here for a couple of reasons. So first, I want you to notice that at the top on the left-hand side, those skills that are listed are all in relationship to language development, having background knowledge and experiences, being able to talk about different things, vocabulary for different things, language structure, that's our syntax, our semantics that we talked about. Verbal reasoning is the child's ability to answer those WH questions or maybe predict something or inference, that idea of like reading between the lines. If I say, I read a story with a child and it was like talking about the present had green and red wrapping paper and it was under a tree. And the child knew they inferenced or read between the lines with their background knowledge that, oh, well, people who celebrate Christmas that usually has the colors green and red, and they usually have a tree, so this must be a Christmas present. And the text never said it. A child who's able to do a lot of verbal reasoning is going to be able to inference when they're reading. Literacy knowledge is just, understanding that print concepts, the directionality of letters, how to hold a book properly, different genres. As children get older, they understand those things. So that's all language. And then at the bottom, we have word recognition. That's where all the speech comes in, all the sounds come in. So we've talked about phonological awareness and understanding what that is. So that's also going to include phonemic awareness, individual sounds, as well as bigger words. And then decoding is looking at a word and understanding the phonics or the alphabet principle in order to read what it says. And sight recognition, especially for young children, you might not necessarily see that in knowing sight words, but they're going to recognize things like familiar logos and things like that. That's their early sight recognition. So I wanted to, before we jump into ways that you can be encouraging and developing these skills in the classroom, I did just want to mention that there's been some newer research, but spoiler alert, it's not that new to those of us in the world of Montessori. A recent study by Dr. Jan Wasowich, she wanted to incorporate these ideas of the reading rope into writing, because reading is the receptive language or the receptive ability to work with written language. But writing is that expressive side, and expressive language is just as important. What she found was that we need all of those same speech and language skills for writing, but this is the really great part for Montessorians. She discovered that there is a more complete transfer of literacy learning from encoding. So if you start with building words, to decoding, moving to reading words. So those of us in the early childhood classroom who are working with things like the movable alphabet to build words before we're teaching children how to then go and decode words, we've been doing this all along. And it's called here in Dr. Wasowitz's research, the speech to print advantage. But this is something that, Dr. Montessori knew 100 years ago. She was saying that the children need to be able to express themselves first and build their words before they can understand how to read a language. And this is just a visual depiction of that same information. So on the left-hand side, it's the reading version of that rope, and it's in here, it's called the Language Literacy Network. On the right-hand side, it's all of those same skills, but in relation to writing. And then at the bottom, the only difference is you'll see encoding or building words for writing versus decoding, which is reading words for the reading side. And this is also available in your resources, a link to this, as well as lots more information about the research that Dr. Wasowicz did. So let's finish up by talking about ways that you can encourage good speech, language, and literacy development in your Montessori classrooms. I put up here right at the very top, high quality literature. I think you're going to hear this from everyone. Every time you talk about anything you need in the classroom, it's high quality literature. This just gives children access to so many different things. It gives them understanding of how to be looking through books properly. It gives them the opportunity to explore different topics. We know in our classrooms, we do a lot of nonfiction and fiction reading. And so just having really good high quality books for children to look at, reading to the children a lot of high quality literature. So they're hearing these examples of good language and good speech, as well as applying that to literacy skills. So then going through those components that we see in the reading rope and the language literacy network, we'll think about things like background knowledge. how do we give children background knowledge in the classroom? We do this through our cultural studies and our continent studies. We pick science topics and concepts to teach them about math concepts. Maybe you do author studies or artist studies, musicians and composers, holidays when we talk about all the different cultures that exist in our classroom and the ways that we celebrate. This gives children a very rich wealth of experience to draw from so that later when they want to express themselves or when they hear others talking or when they're reading and writing about these things, they have a large body of knowledge to draw on. When we think about vocabulary for the children, we give 3-period lessons. And so when we're naming in that first period, we're naturally providing vocabulary to the children. But then we also think about curriculum specific concepts. This child was learning about the parts of the circulatory system. And so she's learning some really specific information that maybe she wouldn't have had a chance to learn the vocabulary for otherwise. Categorizing. We talked about the schema and the way children build semantic relationships. We do a lot of categorizing in our classroom. We do a lot of grading, like the gradation of the pink cubes or the brown prisms, our knobless cylinders. All of these things give children the opportunity to improve their vocabulary skills as they're describing what they're doing. And then language structure. So, oops, sorry about that. We want to always be modeling appropriate grammar for the children, making sure that we're giving them opportunities to hear how syntax is used in the language that we're communicating in. And we also want to make sure that we are offering them opportunities for things like story dictation, helping them to develop sentences and whole thoughts, and then watching how an adult puts it down on paper for them. Um, Going back to the recasting item, I wanted to mention that recasting is this idea that helps to validate what a child is saying. So when a child says something in error, like, I go to school yesterday, rather than saying, oh, we don't say goed, we say went. You could say, oh, yes, you went to school yesterday. What this does, it does two things. It validates what the child has said, but it also offers them a model so they can listen and understand later when after they've heard it a few times, they're going to understand that, oh, I need to say this differently the next time. Other things that we can use in the classroom, phonological awareness. We do lots of games in the classroom, right? We play rhyming games, we play initial sound I spy, we have the sandpaper letters for that phonics and awareness. I put a little asterisk next to the sandpaper letters because I wanted to mention this is a really good opportunity for you as a teacher to notice if a child is having difficulty with certain speech sounds because they're going to be imitating you and making the sound as they trace the letter. And if you're noticing that there's any errors, this is a perfect chance to say, oh, notice what I do. If you're making the sound, notice where I put my tongue. It's hiding behind my teeth. And give them a chance to try it. Some children just need an awareness that they're not making a sound properly. They don't necessarily need any sort of therapy for it. But then if you notice that it's persisting even after they've practiced a few times, you might have an idea like, oh, maybe we need to get that child checked out for some speech sound errors. And then another really fun segmenting and our phonological awareness game that I enjoy with my students is segmenting and blending with colored gems. And so you'll see on the bottom picture, there's two children, and they have two red gems and a blue gem to correspond with our sandpaper letters and our movable alphabet. And they're each just looking at a picture. One looks at a picture and points to the red gem for the first sound, the blue gem for the middle sound, which is the vowel, and the red gem for the last sound. And then the other child has to try and guess what the word was. So one child is segmenting word. The other child is trying to blend the sounds together. Again, there's no letters involved here. We're just doing that phonological and phonemic awareness. And then sight words in our classrooms, we have name cards. The children are learning to recognize their names. There are puzzle words. You can teach children certain words, maybe 3 at a time, the same way you would with the sandpaper letters or anything else you introduce maybe 3 at a time and you go through all 3 periods and spend a lot of time learning those words. And then we have scavenger hunts. My students used to love, if you notice in that bottom picture, my assistant teacher is sitting in a chair kind of in the upper center, and to his right, you'll see the letter M stuck on the cabinet there. And the children used to love to go around and look for sounds. And then as they got better, we would change it to words. They'd go and look for words and match them to a sheet of paper that had the words all written out. So scavenger hunts can be a really fun way for them to work on that. And then, of course, encoding and decoding our writing and our reading skills. How do we, work on those things with the children in the classroom? So, of course, encoding, we want to do that first. Montessori said it, and now we've got all this modern research saying we should do it. Build the words first. So we're going to go to that movable alphabet. We're going to give children word families and think about, okay, if I have mat, let's take the away, put a different sound. Oh, yep, we're gonna make the word sat. What sound do you need at the beginning? That sort of thing. Playing around with words with the movable alphabet. Another really fun activity that my students love is writing the room. So I like the picture here. This is actually a really great picture because it offers a few different things. So there's a child looking through a book, but our classroom pet, the gerbil, is sitting there and watching her. And then up on the gerbil's cage, you'll notice this little piece of lined paper. Someone wrote the word gerbil. Give the children a chance to sound out the names of objects in the environment, write it down, and put that label up there for everyone else to look at. And then, of course, our copy work, giving children the ability to practice the mechanics of writing words so that we can move away from the movable alphabet and actually give them access to writing with paper and pencil. And then decoding activities, so those reading activities, of course, we have a beautiful library where we can try and make sure we're changing out the books to things that children are interested in or things that relate to a curriculum topic that we're studying, as well as books that are of high interest to the children to keep them motivated and wanting to practice their reading. I don't know if your school has the Washika reading drawers. This is really great for moving from CVC words to consonant blends in a very systematic kind of way. And then this child here is looking at a book on CD, which I know is a little old-fashioned, but we have a CD player in the classroom and some books that have the accompanying CDs, and they love to just, put those headphones on and follow along. And it even offers a little like chime when it's time for them to turn the page so they can be sure that they're following the story properly. And then real and nonsense words I had on there. That's a fun game where you can write CVC words and have real words and nonsense words, and children can read these words to each other and have to decide, is that a real word or is that a nonsense word? And they have a lot of fun. You can have like a little cup with gems, like, okay, if it's a nonsense word, the gem goes in this cup. If it's a real word, the gem goes in this cup. Let's see what wins at the end, that sort of thing. And so that's just a sort of variety of ideas of ways that you either already are incorporating the development of these skills in your room, or maybe some ideas to sort of move along and try some different things with the students that you're working with. And so I wanted to just end with this quote from Dr. Montessori herself, because she said it best when she talked about the relationship of speech and language and the relationship to literacy skills, or she says writing here. So she said, the possession of the art of writing is not a mere skill. It represents the possession of a superior form of language added to its natural form. Written language complements spoken language and is integrated with it. Spoken language is developed naturally in every man. And that is from The Formation of Man in 1949. And so, yeah, so like she said, spoken language is that foundation that children are going to use. All children learn to use a language, and then they build upon it to create their literacy knowledge. And so they need that good, strong foundation to then move on to these literacy skills. This is a list of resources that I have also shared with Susan. So she will, if she hasn't already, she can share this with you. They should be links that you can click right on if you're interested in any of the learning more about these topics. These are my references. And this is my contact information. So if at any point you have any questions about, students in your classroom, or just maybe things that you see happening frequently in your classroom and needs like a little bit more information, please feel free to reach out. And I'm going to leave or finish the slideshow here with this beautiful picture of one of my former students. He was working with the movable alphabet, and he said, "The boy is going on a journey, just like each and every one of our students are going on a journey in their development." So I'm going to stop sharing now so I can see who's here. And I know that you're all in your classrooms, and so it's quiet and hopefully very peaceful where you are. But if you have any questions and you want to maybe type them in the chat, we can take a look there, and I will do my best to answer them.
One clarification, Jessa, when you said the scavenger hunt, so we had the M on the side of your shelf.
Yeah.
Kids going around and finding M words in the environment, or
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. You can do that in so many different ways, and we've done it a variety of ways. So at that point in the year, we only had a certain number of letters out. So I think it was like 5 letters, and we had a sheet that went along with it, and the children could take their little clipboard and put their sheet on the clipboard. But the sheet did not have letters. The sheet had pictures on it. And so they had to go around and find the um, the letter that corresponded with each picture. But you could absolutely do it in reverse. You could have the letters on the paper and have pictures around the room, or just ask them to go find objects around the room.
I'm
And
listening.
then, oh, and then, yeah, so you could do it that way. You know, there's a variety of ways, and you can change it up depending on your students. If they're catching on really quickly, you can mix it up for them, pick new letters, do more letters. You know, there's so many ways to go about it. But yeah,
else have any questions or
anyone else?
ideas? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jess. I will be sending out the resources also for you, so you'll have those. And this is being recorded, so I will put it into a YouTube video, and then we can share that as well for anybody who missed. So, thank you so much, Jess. Really informative, great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. I hope you have a great day.